Yeah. So what's happening is I have been dealing with Hacked Off since 2016. Graham Johnson, he worked, I believe, for the News of the World just for seven months and got sacked, but he's now working for Hacked Off. He approached me and said, I had worked for the News of the World for from 1993 to about 2004, and then worked for The Sun for 2003 to 2009. You still with me? Yeah. So he said, now there was a falling out with them. Basically, a journalist called Nick Parker had done a scam call on Heather Mills and had set up a whole facade where he sent her fake emails. I wasn't involved in it at all. Then it screwed up in some way, and he asked me to speak to her using a pretext. He wasn't even very clear on what that was. She then rang me on this phone that he passed me and started to say that she knew I was working for News International. And so I, tried to diffuse the situation. I didn't agree with what Parker had done, promised her money, etc., etc. It was all very abusive. So I, was trying to speak to her. She then put that on her website, and Chris Farrow, the news editor, rang me and said, you're not wanted anymore. You should have slammed the phone down on her. Well, it's not my way to abuse people, so, I didn't want to slam the phone down on her. And then, so that was in 2009. I was feeling a bit badly towards The Sun, quite frankly. So when Graham Johnson said, let's meet up, we went to Kew Gardens, we sat there, had coffee, cake, and he said, I want you to help out with stuff, because I started as a private investigator, and that was, but I then also have been out in Belfast and worked as a journalist on the Real IRA, UDA, got many bylines in the Sunday Times. So I would say I was a journalist part of the time as well, if not most of the time, because the stuff I was doing wasn't PI stuff. Yeah. So, and I also had my NUJ pass for a long time, and bylines as well. So he said, we want you to help Hacked Off. We'll go through, provide us with your remittance advices for when you work for the News of the World, and I'd also worked for the Daily Mail on a more or less full-time basis, also for 10 years. And he wanted all those remittance advices, and literally my entire career's remittance advices with stories I'd worked on, payments, etc. They offered me £25,000 to do that. That then quickly went down to 16,000 to do that. I had a meeting with them, signed a contract to say if I hand them over, and then it went from the 16 grand payment down to it would be 3,000 per 6 months, but I would have to tell them everything I'd done on each job. Now, I wasn't worried about doing that because I had never done anything illegal. Now, they assume that every private investigator is Glyn Mulcair, is a phone hacker. Well, this isn't so. I'd worked in the private investigations business since I was 16. I worked for ex-CID officers. I worked for ex-MI6 officers. I worked alongside ex-MI5 officers. I was well clued up with the law. Now, most of these people, certainly the agencies I worked for, I always used to say, do you want to work for the press? I had dated a guy called Phil Hall, who then became the news editor of the News of the World. He had written a story about me. I'd been writing to the Moors murderer, Ian Brady. He then posted all over the front pages of the People that I was his illegitimate daughter. It was complete and utter rubbish. They didn't pay me for it. He then used me, took me off to the south of France, had a sexual relationship with him. He dumped me in an Earl's Court brothel, homeless and jobless. So this was my experience of the press, but I still announced to people I work for, wouldn't it be interesting to do, to investigate on stories, just because I realised that Phil Hall was, disingenuous. He wasn't very bright. And I thought, well, if he can be something as professional as a journalist, I can be a journalist too. So this was in my mind. And also, I'd gone off to America and filed copy on stories, and they'd got into print, albeit under Phil Hall's name. So I had this journalist capability, and I was sick of doing PI work. But the PIs always said to me, we don't work for them, they're utter scum, and they turn you over. So they hire you for a period of time. You do stuff that they see as illegal. It might well be illegal. They turn you over to the cops, and then they write a story about you. And I said, well, hang on, there's a way around this. What about we work for them and make sure you never do anything illegal? There are ways of not doing illegal things as an investigator, certainly a highly experienced investigator. So I sent off my CV to Greg Miskew, News of the World, Alex Maranchek, the Sunday Mirror, and the Daily Mail. And I ended up working for them. It started slowly, but it built up to a crescendo. I was doing undercover work. I worked a bit with Mazhar Mahmood, and I got to a high level. I was earning a six-figure sum. I was well sought after. I had a massive reputation. The Daily Mail used to ring me and say, can we borrow your genius? And my skill was that I would look at a story and then sleep on it and know intuitively who to go to, what to say to them to get to them to cough the story, because I've got a sharp sixth sense. And I was pretty well sought after, and I was enjoying myself. Now, come 2000, no, I think it was 2000, maybe 1999, I'm not really sure. Greg Miskew started giving me too much work. Now, I had already moved into doing more journalistic work. I was getting real IRA stories. I was connecting up with contacts in Belfast, and I wanted to be a defence journalist. And I'd also working as a PR voluntarily for the RAF, because this was my what I wanted to do. Now, Greg Miskew's private investigator, Southern Investigations, went to prison. He then started saying to me, oh, I want you to find out who's on the end of the phone. Now, I had it in my mind, hang on, this is, finding out stuff. It's to do with data. No matter how well I know you, and I knew Greg very well, very personally, we'd become friends. I'm never going to do anything illegal for you people. I know what you're like. I know how snaky you are. They used to blackmail people also, so I didn't want to give them any blackmail stuff on me either. So I said, I can't do this kind of work. I can ring up and find out who it is, but I can't, data thief for you. So I introduced them to a PI I know that does that data stuff. I don't have anything to do with it. This guy called John Boyle, and he's very rich from it because, yes, it's very lucrative, but it's very risky. So the people that do it, they have ways of keeping one step ahead of the law. They get tip-offs from top cops. They know things like removing hard drives from computers. They're criminals, or they're mastermind criminals. So I introduced John Boyle, even though I didn't, I knew people that did criminal records checks. I knew people that hacked emails, and they would say to me, introduce me to the News of the World. But I said, look, these people are evil. They're going to use that to get real dirt on people and blackmail them and all sorts. I'm not going to introduce you. But I thought John Boyle, who was someone that I dated as well, was a decent guy, and wouldn't ever give them anything criminal or help them, get spy on people to a really strong degree. But I was completely wrong. He straight away brought in the phone hacking. He's a very wealthy ex-public school boy. He was charging them, I think, a lot of money, maybe $5,000 per hack. They, of course, didn't want that. They didn't want to pay that. So what they did, they stole his office boy, who was Glenn Mulcair. Now, the office boy was a footballer, somebody that John had trained up and paid pennies. The News of the World easily lured him with a contract and flashy dinners. He's like, you know, a very working class lad, not very bright by all accounts, and I've heard that said from Greg Miskew and John Boyle. So they basically used him, you know, and told him, oh, it's okay to hack the royal family, it's okay. So this poor victim, I'd say, was doing this, and of course John Boyle found out, grasped them up to the police. The police put a listening van outside his house. He was arrested, Clive Kilburn was arrested, and Operation Wheating started investigating. Now they rang me. I went to see them, sat for 6 hours with them, gave them a 60-page statement of what had happened, what I had ever done for you know, and I told them my backstory and why I went into that business, with a crafty eye on who they were. And I had already experienced with Greg Miskew one time in the pub, despite him being a personal friend of mine. I'd went in and told him I wanted to work for another newspaper to do a shift because I didn't want to be a PI. And he said to me, you go and work for that other newspaper, I'll throw you to the police and all your criminal activity. And I looked at him and I said, oh dear, Greg, I've never, ever, ever done anything criminal for you. So let's go to the police together, shall we? And see, I knew these people. You know, I'd been, you know, sexually abused by Phil Paul. I was very, very aware of who they were. No way was I ever even going to do something tiny criminal for them. What happened, it was around that time when Greg Miskew told me he had somebody that could do medical records, and he said to me, can you do medical records? And I said, well, it's not something PIs do, you know, how would they do them? And he said, oh, I'm not going to tell you. And so I thought it's strange, and I tried to find out who this girl was. I believe she's called Rachel. I tried to ring around, you know, because as far as I know, that's an impossibility. So one day when I was in the office, I just came back from working with Maz and Mahmood. Greg Miskew said to me, Cheryl Cole has had a boob job. I want you to ring the clinic and find out if it's true. Now that is illegal, it's data theft. So I thought, I don't want to do it. And I looked at him and said, I'm really tired, I don't want to do it. And he goes, get on the fucking phone now and do it. So picked up the phone and I thought, I'm not going to do something criminal. Rang the number kept ringing. And I literally, my head was spinning. What do I do? What do I do? Obviously didn't want to get the sack from my job. I felt, you know, a bit, because I grew up in care, I was a little bit easily bullied. But there's no way I was going to do anything criminal for him. Luckily, he got up, walked across the room. The phone kept ringing out. Somebody picked up and answered, and I put the phone down. And I stood up and I thought, hang on, he's made it very clear he knows Cheryl Cole has had this boob job, because he said it's 100% true. We've had it stood up here, there. It's just one more avenue we need it stood up from. So I thought I should probably had it. So I put the phone, I went, yeah, you're right, 100%. And he stood up and he went, oh my God, everyone, stop what you're doing. And announced to the whole office, there's about 10 people there in the news desk at the time, the other desk to the side. He said, Christine Hart can get people's medical records. And I looked at him, I thought, it's kind of a weird thing to say. Firstly, people keep, you know, anybody can do special things, they keep it to themselves. I think looking back now, he was trying to push blame for things over to me. I mean, I might be wrong. So anyway, next thing, Greg, anytime somebody was in hospital or pregnant, he would ask me. I would merely, this was with other work as well, so I would literally be going out all week. Maybe if it was on one story, I could only charge for a shift. At that time, it was £120. Now, it meant that I could work all week out on the ground and only earn £120. So if he would ask me something like this, just, I don't know, check out Gwyneth Paltrow is pregnant, ring her a clinic, I would write down, not do it, I'm not going to ever do anything illegal, write it down, put down £120, and then I would get £240, which is more like a week's wage that you can survive on. You know, working for the other newspapers, obviously, you know, I managed to make money. That 1 year I made 6 figures, but then after a while it dropped down because I just couldn't work 7 days a week for so many hours. So I was averaging, I think, 50 grand a year, working 7 days a week, never taking a holiday. 8 a.m. through to 9 p.m. at night. And I ended up sick, ended up in hospital. I had a heart issue, and that, of course, is when I brought in Boyle, and then all the newspapers started to use me so much less, but I managed then to go and move to Belfast and work for the City Times. So when I came back, I was pregnant and single mother, no support, no parents, and lived in a house, and the Sun rang me and headhunted me, and so I started working for them. They started to, I let slip, I was going to the Priory. I'd been to the Priory since 1995. I let it slip to Chris Barrow, the editor there. He then started to get me to check on this celebrity, that celebrity, Liz Hurley, who had gone in the Priory. And then it started again that, oh, check if such and such is pregnant. Now, going in the Priory, there's no way I'm going to spy him at somewhere where I go, and I'd been for, over a decade, and I knew my doctor, Dr. Mark Collins, and so I told him, and he said, well, you need the money to come here, because I was dealing with childhood issues, the rejection of my father of my child, and that hit me really hard, and having a child alone and worrying, would I drop dead, would he end up in care? I'd spent my life in care, there was lots of paedophiles, so I was in a position of feeling not great, not 100%, and he said, look, you need the money to come here, so just tell them a load of shit, just make it up as you go along. So I started to do that, and yes, I obviously charged them if they would say, check Liz Hurley's in the Priory. I'm not going to do it, but of course I'm going to write it down on an invoice. It came to a point where they rang me one day and said, Sienna Miller has had an abortion. They gave me the name of this clinic, and they said, ring it. And I remember exactly where I was, and I thought, you're on your Nelly. Not with any of these, but when they come to a very super famous person like that, it's just absurd that anybody would touch that with a barge pole. I remember exactly where I was, and I said to Chris Barrow, the news editor of The Sun, I said, oh, whose baby is it? Just because I'm a naturally curious person. I'm a journalist as well. And they said, Jude Law, and we want you to ring Jude Law. And they'd give me some phone numbers of her friends, and I thought, as if you're going to ring any high self-esteem friends of, I'm, on some jobs I might well ring round people and, try and find out things, as long as it's not breaking the law. So I decided in this case I didn't want to go anywhere near it, and I decided, because it was a pregnancy termination, that isn't a story. So I thought, hang on, why do you want to know this? It was like really sinister. I went in, I talked to a friend of mine about it, and I said, this is so sinister. I went to a mother and baby group that day, and I had Jude Law's phone number, and these women are quite well-to-do. They live in big mansions, have fancy husbands. I was feeling quite low self-esteem, and I said, oh, I've just remembered I've got to interview Jude Law today, and they all got a little bit nose out of joint, but I sort of, showed them his number and rang, and he answered. So it's showing off. I didn't mention Sienna Miller. I was just showing off in front of a lot of other women. I can't remember exactly what I said to him. Probably something like, oh, a journalist can have an interview. He would have said no, yada, yada, yada. So I was telling this to Hacked Off. They wrote that down. They put me in a flat. They rented me a flat. It was by the riverside. At that point, I said to them, I twigged, the MP Evan Harris was involved. I twigged that because I saw him, I signed the contract with them, but I saw Evan Harris in the bar in this Knightsbridge hotel, and when someone went over and goes, she signed, he went, oh my God, crack open the champagne. And I thought, hang on a minute, what's really going on here? This isn't just about press being bad, they're going to try and get compensation for all these celebrities. And I thought, hang on though, I haven't done anything criminal, and they probably need me to have done something criminal to get compensation. Turns out they didn't, but I didn't know that. And I thought, I'm not going to sit here and rip these people off. They seemed quite powerful. So I decided to pull out. And I didn't like the way I was treated by by Johnson. I brought my son along to this hotel. My son was very hungry. He was only 6, I think, at the time, maybe a bit older. And I said, could my son have a sandwich? And he looked at me and he goes, no, it's much too expensive here. And I thought, hang on, I'm bringing you something that can create literally tens of 20 million more, and you're denying my child a sandwich. So I went back and I destroyed all the Mamet's advices just because I thought, hang on, these people, firstly, need me to have done something criminal. I haven't. Secondly, they just abused my son. I'm not. They're treating me. They're getting millions out of me, yet they're treating me like absolute crap. And they're not even offering me, any. I mean, £3,000. It then whittled down to £3,000. I went back to the Riverside house, and next 3 days passed, and I was burgled. Now, I was burgled when the CID came to investigate and brush for fingerprints. They said, look how they got in, it's a professional job. I said, well, I didn't even know I was burgled. There was white carpet in the place. There wasn't a footprint on it. I had jewellery and a Gucci vintage watch. They had to get my laptops from my bedroom. They had to go out the door, and there was a dressing table with the silver vintage Gucci watch and a gold bracelet on there, and they didn't pick it up. So aren't they weird burglars? They took my tech, they took my new computer, and they took an old computer that I'm sure was falling apart, and they took my cameras, and didn't touch anything else, including the jewellery. And I rang Graham Johnson at that time, and I said I'd been burgled, and he said, oh, it was just scallies, just be grateful your son isn't hurt. And I thought nothing of it, bizarrely, a bit slow in the uptake. Then I arranged, he said, have you got any remittances left? I had a load of remittances from the Daily Mail. He said, meet me and I'll pay you £4,000 for, I'll buy them off you. I put some of them in my, a lot of them were stolen with the laptops because they were in the laptop bag. I had them on my desk. I put them in my handbag and I was going to meet him. Next thing, my son's headmistress called. There was an issue at the school. I rang him, couldn't get through. Then I was sitting in the headmistress's office. He rang me. I put him on speakerphone and he went, where are you? And I said, oh, I'm with my son's headmistress, thinking he'd get sorry. And he went, you turn up right now, I'll come to your house and kick your fucking door down. This is all in front of me. I was very upset. I started crying, went back home and called the police again and reported. I said, look, the reason I was burgled is because it's worth like millions to these people, and I'm very scared. And so they said, we'll keep a watch on the house. And, I said what Graham had said. They wrote that down. They said if he does anything, he'll be arrested. And this went on. Anyway, fast forward to 2021, and a journalist, ex-editor of the Independent on Sunday, contacted me and said, would I like to do an interview with Hacked Off? Now, they have a paper called Byline, and in it, Graham Johnson had blogged about me. Oh, Christine gets people's medical records. Completely untrue. I was contacted by the Sun, had a meeting with the Sun, went over every job that I did, told them what I did on every job. They said to me, Clifford Chance, you've done nothing illegal. I said, I know I've done nothing illegal. I talked to Operation Wheating, and I was a star witness against News International. I've done nothing but help, and I've also helped Hacked Off. They didn't know I worked for the Sun. I told them that and said, how can I help you? With them, proper press practices, etc., etc. I was the whistleblower, the good person, apparently, but apparently Hacked Off needed me to be bad. So anyway, the Sun said to me, right, they've come for us legally, would you be prepared to swear in court? I said, I can't wait to get into court to get all this flushed out, because there'd been blackmail involved and all sorts, and they'd got all this information, but they had merely asked me to tick a box. So I thought, well, it's great, because how they actually got all this personal information on people will be flushed out. So naive of me. Anyway, came to court, Murdoch rolled over, and he paid out, and he paid out, and he paid out. I would say he was protecting for somebody. I know John Boyle worked for the Sun up to 2009, so I'm guessing they hacked people, found out these details, came to me to tick a box. I didn't do it, but they still went in on my invoices, said I did, so they were blaming me in court. It suited everyone. And so then Byline were writing about me. Apparently I was a medical records hunter. I rang him and said, that's an impossibility. How would I possibly have done that? And he said, oh, you rang Sienna Miller's GP and said you were her aide. I said, mate, how would that possibly work? That man needs to be struck off. Sienna Miller came out in court and apparently announced everybody that I'd rang her GP. It was reported in The Guardian, BBC. Nothing I could do about it. I'm not lawyered up. I rang the NUJ. They said it counts as slander and we can't help you. Fast forward again about a year, James Hanning said, oh, you should put the record straight. You know, we'll help you. Do an interview. So I did an interview about speaking to Diana with James Hanning, Princess Diana, when she was alive, for the Sunday Mirror. That was totally twisted. It was given to Tina Brown Palace Papers that I had stood up her having an affair with Hasnat Khan. Totally, totally wrong. I had spoken to her under instruction from Chris Boffey, I believe, for the Sunday Mirror. I had said, I can't legally say this is Princess Diana I've just been speaking to, so I don't want to get involved in this story. I don't think I even charged for it. So they said to me, that's fine, we've stood up this story. But Graham Johnson has put out everywhere, including to Tina Brown in her book, that I was the one who stood up her affair with Hasnat Khan. Now, I never would have done that in a million years. So he was writing all this about me. Hanning said, oh, you should tell your own story. So he said the BBC want to do an interview with you about all this. It's your chance to speak out about yourself. So I thought, well, that's good because I'm really, really upset, you know, about everything that's gone on. So he arranged for me to go to the Richmond Hill Hotel. The BBC were there. James Newton, his assistant Megan. They did a big film and they asked me about my life as a working care. I got to the press, somebody writing a story, front page story, that I was Ian Brady's daughter, I became his lover, and I basically got groomed to go into Fleet Street, more or less. And so then they went on, what did you do for the Mail? I talked about a phone call to Doreen Lawrence. They have since set up an attack legally on the Daily Mail. From what I've told in the testimony, I didn't think I was giving legal information. I thought I was being interviewed by the BBC. So they've started that legal stuff on Doreen Lawrence versus the Mail. Apparently I'm going to be a witness, and yet I wasn't even told. Then he said to me, James Newton, oh, you, great interview. They also confronted me about Sienna and said, you know, to talk about it. I talked about it, I started crying, I was really upset. They then confronted me about an email I had written to Chris Farrow to say, oh, you can't ask me to do this stuff. What if the public found out? And I said, mate, I wasn't doing the stuff, but he thought I was. So I was trying to ask him not to give me it in a roundabout way, adding, yes, I'm doing it, but I don't want to do it in the future. I had to speak to him this way. And they were making out that that was evidence, and they caught me out. But I replied to them straight away. Then we all went and had dinner, and James Newton said to me, I want to do more filming of you. And I thought, hang on, we just did over 3 hours of straight filming. What more could you possibly ask? You haven't asked there. Why would you want to ask anything else? And he said to me, oh, it's for long shots of you walking your dog in Richmond Park. So I said, well, okay. Came the day, it was a couple of months later, and I asked for payment for that interview from Hacked Off. They said, we can't pay you anything, we can buy you a suit. So they brought me a suit from Joseph. For the second interview in the park, they brought me a dress from Joseph. Anyway, so I went to the park, walking up and down. I took them to a far off place. They said, take us to your favourite place. There's two of them. I took them to a far off place. It was quite a long walk. They stood there in the woods with me, and they started being really aggressive to me. They started shouting about Lily Allen, Wayne Rooney. You did this, didn't you? This is what says here. I was very upset. I tried not to show it, but I certainly looked like upset. You know, I looked like on one of these Roger Cook programs where someone, you know, when they confront people and they're coming out, oh, did you do this? Did you do that? Did you? Oh, so we've got evidence. It looked like that. And I thought, hang on, you've invited me here. I've just did a sit down with you where I've told you things that made me an enemy of the Daily Mail. I've come here voluntarily. You're supposed to get shots of me next to the woods. And yet you're doing a Roger Cook on me. And I said, hey, this isn't right what you're doing. And he says, well, you explain yourself. And both of them were having a go at me at once. And I actually felt for 1 minute I was going to have a heart attack. My chest felt tight. But I thought, hang on, Christine, you've got nothing to hide. Just tell them. So I just said, you know, I told them my truth. And I said, you're saying all these things to me. I'm a medical records hunter. How did I do that then? And they said, oh, you ring doctors and you pretend to be somebody and pretend to be some. I said, mate, that wouldn't work. I've been a PI since I was 16 years of age. That wouldn't work. And if there were such these doctors, they deserve then to be pulled out, confronted, and asked and said, how come you're that stupid that some fool rings you, asks you something, and you tell somebody's private medical records? I said, let's bring that. I said, have you talked to these doctors? And he went, no, we haven't. You've written it, or you wrote Sienna Miller pregnancy checks on your invoice. I said, that's because I was bullied to ring a clinic. There's no way I'm going to do it. But I certainly wasn't asked to ring a GP. In other cases, I was asked to ring people's GPs. But in all cases, I most certainly didn't do it, because if you ring somewhere like that, it's data theft. And also, not only is it data theft, all calls are recorded to such places. So it'd be like robbing a building society with a camera and no mask. Specifically, the police would have your voice, which I'm sure they've got a way of testing that it's your voice, if you put on an American accent or something. And I'm sure they have ways of tracing panning the camera around, pushing it up to my face and said, yeah, what about this, what about this, what about this, and what about Wayne Rooney, what about Lily Allen? You rang Lily Allen's doctor when he was at home, and pushing the camera in my face. Absolutely didn't. The Lily Allen thing was when another journalist who they harassed said to me, oh, you should make up some stuff. He said, who's their favourite celebrity? I said, oh, that's Lily then. Everyone's so obsessed with Lily Allen. And he said, well, ring him and say, I was asked that it was Lily Allen pregnant. So I did that. And they obviously bounced that over to him. And then he announced that I had rang Lily Allen's GP at home. It's total bullshit. I said, this is a scam. I said, and they've scammed stuff out of a judge. Conning, Graham Johnson, has stood forward, said, I can do this. I certainly couldn't, showing no evidence of it, bar my name on invoices and a story, and has announced to the judge, because Murdoch was over, the judges went, okay, and that's it. And they've come out of court and got buddy journalists like this Jim, I can't remember his second name, from The Guardian, to report it, to make it fact. Now, I thought they lied to me. James Hanning said, this is your chance to put your story forward, but apparently it's not. Apparently, James Newton just wants to get the Daily Mail. What they've always wanted to do is go to the Daily Mail and say, you hired Christine Hart as a private investigator. This is who she is. She's a medical records hunter, whatever that is. You must have done that. Here's stories that you did about celebrities being ill. It must have been her. Hand over millions to us. And they kicked that off now with the Doreen Lawrence attack, but they have a whole plan for the Daily Mail. I still didn't pull out of the BBC filming, but next thing, James Newton began to ring me quite regularly. I told him not to ring me because he started to stress me out by saying, first of all, he kept saying, are you stressed out about all this? I said, mate, I've never done anything wrong, so no, I'm not stressed out, because, you know, I know that I haven't done anything wrong. I've spoken to the police about it. I think you should go to the police. And he went, the police won't help us. I said, well, that's because nothing actually happened, mate. And he goes, but don't worry, we'll be saying this out. We've spoken to a policeman on the film, and the policeman has said, oh, when you commit a crime, the bar's really high. So lots of people can commit crimes, but never get arrested. I said, you're going to say that about me? I said, I most certainly did not. I said, you have to tell the story about how I got into Fleet Street. I went there as a victim of a front page. I was groomed sexually to go there as their dirty worker. I was literally, they told me to have sex with one of the commanders, the top commander of the real IRA. They told me to get in cars with rapists. I was used as a dirty doer for years and years, but I always thought, no way will I do anything illegal for you guys. I will pretend to, but I won't do it. And I kept that because I thought, I'm not going to prison. I'm not going to prison for you people. And then when I had my baby son, I most certainly was really careful with what they asked me to do. I'm not going to have go to Holloway and have my son go into care and get raped. The pedophiles in there. Anyway, James Newton kept ringing me. I said, you're insulting me. I helped you. I came forward. I did a interview with you. James Hanning was then offering to write a book about my life. And because I'd met two serial killers, Ian Brady and Ken Bianchi, I said, well, there's a lot of interest in my book. I'm not sure I can just hand it over to you. And they said, oh, we'll sign a contract to say we're not interested in the serial killers. We're just interested in the work you did for the press. And I said, well, how is that interesting? And I said, what about my childhood in care and being raped as a child? Oh, we don't want that either. So I thought, hang on, how am I going to be portrayed here? You can't leave out how I got into Fleet Street. You can't leave out the serial killers. You can't leave out how I was traumatized through being raped repeatedly as a child, which is why I went to the serial killers. That's my entire life story. You can't just totally pick this apart. Anyway, I was meeting up with Graham Johnson and James Hanning. They were saying over dinner and steak and plying me with wine and saying, oh, we're going to buy your book, we'll give you $6,000 for it, but we want the documentary rights for your life story. I again reiterated that I had my life story published by Hodder and Stoughton before, and I was writing a new version of it, and I wanted to write about my life and care about being raped and then making something of myself as a journalist. They then reiterated, we just want your work that you did for the press. And I thought, how could that be a book? Nobody would read it. Even people who haven't read Mazza Mahmood's book, Confessions of a Fake Sheikh. Why would they? Anyway, it was a blag. It's rich that they go on about blagging when they're blagging me. Anyway, I brought a tape to them. I got all this on tape and all their stuff, including a threat by Evan Harris, the MP, that I could do this in the nice way or the nasty way. Anyway, I went away. I was considering signing over documentary rights and a book deal, but turns out that all they want is the stuff that James Newton has done. Apparently, they want to get rights from that so they can go to Netflix and say, oh, here's this person, she did this, when I didn't. And you have to take in every aspect of who I am to see why and how I, wouldn't let go of my career. Why should I let go of my career just because Rebekah Brooks asked me to do this on Sienna Miller? I don't want to do it. If I'd have said no, they would have just told me to get lost. I want to hang on with my career. I had already gone over and, dirtied myself in Northern Ireland. I'd already sold my soul. I'm not going to ever let go of becoming a journalist and go and work in Tesco. So they knew all this, and this is my story, and I got it across well. But I started to realise that James Newton just wanted one version. And in that version, I play the criminal that has stolen data. I wouldn't do that in a million years. Anyway, so he kept ringing me and saying, oh, poor Sienna Miller, she so suffered. She was in the paper for being pregnant. I said, mate, I was asked to check, to ring a clinic on a pregnancy termination. I wasn't even asked her. But I put in the invoices to protect Sienna Miller pregnancy checks rather than put the word abortion that everyone in the accounts office would ring. They used that as so-called proof that I had rung her GP, posing as her aide. I then said to Newman, produce this GP. He said, no, you won't be able to. He kept ringing me and saying she suffered Sienna Miller has suffered. You made her suffer. I was crying at that point. I said, look, I've helped you people. What do you want from me? And he said, oh, nothing, but I just want you to know how much she suffered. Now, I grew up in care and I was sexually abused. And I was also a front page story for being the daughter of a world famous serial killer when I wasn't. So I think I've got the edge on suffering to Sienna Miller being in the paper, being pregnant, in between having a wonderful life. And it started to have a really bad effect on me because I've got a YouTube channel. One day I went around my mother's house, my adopted mother who actually beat me and the father who sexually abused me. And I was that disturbed by everything. I literally went down the alleyway and I was touching the walls and I was just trying to get in, just to go somewhere where I feel safe. And then I went to the nearby park and I was crying down the phone and said, there's nowhere I feel safe. They're framing me. They're trying to frame me for something I didn't do. And I know that if you cut and paste and do like an interview in a certain way, you can make somebody look as if they're guilty. And I realised then that whole big 3-hour interview with James Hanning, they weren't going to use that at all. All that was got for evidence to attack the Daily Mail. All they wanted was me in the part where they looked like I'd been walking along, they jumped out, oh, here she is, we've got her, yeah, you did this, you did that, and they weren't going to use that sit down. So I look as if I'm some kind of guilty person. And so I did the YouTube, I put it up, and James Newton must have been watching my YouTube, because the next thing he said to me, you seem like you're stressed out. Are you stressed out by the program? You've hurt Sienna Miller, she's suffering. And I said, please don't ring me again, go through James Hanning. He ignored that. He totally kept ringing me all the time. I haven't got his mobile. He uses a withheld number. And he said, oh, we've got Dr. Robin, the BBC doctor, because you seem stressed out by the programme, you can talk to Dr. Robin. So I talked to Dr. Robin about, you know, what happened, about how it had kicked back on my past. I felt abused. I feel like I was being framed, and yet I'd come forward to try and help them and do something good in life. And he just sat and listened, really. And he said, why were you in the Priory? And I said, well, I'd rather keep that private. And he said, oh, have you ever been diagnosed as anything? Any like issues? I said, well, that's private, isn't it? And it was nice though. But I thought, is this like not to help me because you've upset me? Is this just kind of fact find? So, but he was a really nice guy, I have to say. Anyway, next thing, James Hanning rings me and says, you know, are you okay? Because I've written a blog about it online. I can send you that blog. But that basically that's where it's at right now. Sorry it was so long.